We're still on track for a 111-point season. You're going to think I'm a bit loopy, but that performance on Saturday actually made me more optimistic for the coming season because we all know Arsenal's title credentials are high. So how we played them should give us reason for comfort. I'll explain as the Holy Trinity show reviews. Aston Villa 0, Arsenal 2. I got to tell you, it's been a really busy week in my household. We've just come back from vacation, all that unpacking. My eldest son just turned 15. I can't believe it. We had a birthday party for him over the weekend, and I've just been hired as a staff coach for our local youth football club. This is a club that has had an Aston Villa-like leadership turnaround, and in the course of 6 weeks, it's been unbelievable what's happened. So this is preseason camp week, and I got to tell you, these little trendsetters have kept me running. I'm exhausted. There are a lot of balls being juggled in the air, and that's why I'm a little behind in getting this show out. This show is presented by 24/7 Services, who are experts at bathroom renovations. They do them right, they do them quickly, they do them at a fair cost. Do you know anyone that might require a bathroom renovation? Like, for example, installing 1,000 urinals, as Paul Hansaker calls them. We call them urinals, instead of a 1970s urine trough. I mean, imagine having a brand new set of trainers. You got the new kit, nice jeans, new trainers. Who would want to walk into that? Gross. I'm actually going to start this week's show with something positive. That's the Sill Hill Brewery Star Performer. Did you get a chance to sample the Sill Hill Brewery tap room? It's just a 25-minute walk or 5-minute Uber ride from Villa Park. And by the way, the Sill Hill bathrooms are brand new and not overflowing. And the obvious recipient of this award was Morgan Rogers, who I'm giving the Blonde Star Award to because, as Unai Emery said in preseason, Morgan, you painted your hair. You are more beautiful now. This performance, above all else, is why I believe that Aston Villa is going to be better than last year, because Rogers was hopping. And there was a masterful balance to his play, pouring into the front third and serving up his teammates. Yes, a slight bitterness as to how unlucky that bounce was off him to Leandro Trossard, but still, he is going to get recognition this season, just like Blonde Star triple hopped Pale Ale, which you can enjoy in person at the Sill Hill Brewery Tap House Thursdays through Sundays. I haven't even officially welcomed you to the Holy Trinity show yet, where I attempt to narrow down the 3 key issues or moments that defined Villa 0, Arsenal 2. Ronan Ward was there, grabbed some footage outside. Senior correspondent Samir Gaby, pictured here by a very nice door in the new club shop, had the honor of going onto the pitch with his Henson colleague, Division Retro pal, Tony Lightwood. What a great perspective of Villa Park this is, which not many people get. The key numbers always tell a story, and one of the reasons why I'm encouraged was that we managed to create 2 outstanding chances against one of the league's stingiest defenses, which is reflected in the XG, despite the unsurprising chasm in possession. Now, the big story will be the big missed chances. And the special stat was ground duels won, where we were for the 2nd straight week excellent and winning a lot of individual battles, thanks in part, heavily, to Morgan Rogers. But we could not turn those turnovers into effective counterattacks yet. And that is reflective in the accurate pass and long pass percentages. It's a no excuse culture at Villa now, and I'm not going to make excuses on their behalf. I just like to present the facts as I see them, and you can't change the fixtures. The fixtures are the fixtures. It's just such a shame that this one came so early in our season as our home opener. And I truly respect and believe in the sincerity of what Mikel Arteta said afterwards, saying that is a really difficult place to play. That is a very well-built team and an excellent manager. These two Basque boys are desperate to beat each other because when they do, they'll be considered almost like chess masters. This was chess on grass. Least surprising issue from Saturday, there were problems with the new digital entry system. Oh, who saw that one coming? Now, as for a different entry, the new player's entrance tunnel, even earlier this year, Chris Heck said that it's just too nice. And as overawed as I was with everything about Villa Park, the entry tunnel did have a slight early 1990s Holiday Inn vibe to it. And one of the issues that has hurt us a little bit in the past is that everybody likes playing at Villa Park, including the opposition. Why wouldn't you? Traditional stadium, gorgeous pitch, hallowed ground, historical area. If you ask any current or ex-pro, they'll tell you Villa Park is among their favorites. And that does not necessarily help us. So what Heck wanted was a less inviting and more intimidating type vibe that gives off this, you are in for a very difficult day. This is not going to be fun for you. Buckle up for a bad experience. And the Villa team itself under Unai Emery has done its part on the field, ideally with these little adjustments and psychological edges. It'll manifest itself at home over the season. Now, apart from repainting the tunnel, the other thing you could do to intimidate the opposition is just send them to the public toilets. Big issue, the 16th minute loss of Matty Cash. Now, last week, even after getting subbed off at West Ham United, you could see Cash grabbing the back of his leg just below his glute, and there was speculation that it was some kind of a tweak and whether he would even be ready for this game. So Unai Emery had a choice, either Diego Carlos, who's played Arsenal pretty well last year, and then Ezri Konsa going to right back, or Costa Nedeljkovic, and the boss opted for the latter. It was the right choice in the end. And when you are forced to step into a game and you don't have time to think about your home debut, you just react and then you survive. But what I'm so impressed about with this player is his maturity, especially in the tracking and the patience department. So many young players will bite or want to dive in rather than keep their feet moving and just stay patient. Because if you do that, so often the ball will eventually come back to your team. Behind the scenes, I believe there are tensions surrounding Diego Carlos after he was appropriately criticized for his exploits against RB Leipzig in preseason, after which he was banished for a couple of games, and that was before we started hearing links with Fulham. But his age and his wages are prohibitive in moving him on. Now, I believe any attempt to land Hertrauder will depend on a player going out the door, and although Unai Emery and his team have shown great tact and adeptness at dealing with individual player tensions, you'd still rather not have those in the first place. Big moment, the Martinez save on Saka. This was the first really big chance of the game, and we've seen Saka score from that exact same spot at Villa Park. It was 3 seasons ago, the only goal in a 1-0 win. So when Big Emmy turned that around the post with the slightest of touches, it felt like a real momentum changer, a boost for him and a boost for his teammates, not to mention the crowd. And our new number 23, who's locked in until 2029, it felt like a bit of a sign at that moment that he was going to shut the back door, which he was desperate to do. Just before we get to the top 3, I mentioned 24/7 Services earlier, the sponsor of this program, and one of the reasons why it was so easy, no-brainer to work with this company is that everybody there is a hardcore Villa fan, and that's not the most important consideration when bringing in somebody new. They have to be good. It's just it worked out that way. Now, the other thing that Paul Handsaker is absolutely adamant about is building long-term relationships with his clients. Paul wants repeat customers, like this one, where they're doing some beautification work on the exterior, among other things. And then ideally, he'd love to work with your kids when they need work done, and ideally, even your grandkids. There is nothing more validating than repeat customers. And when a client says, Paul, here are my keys, can you please put the kettle on before your crew leaves? That's when you know you have a customer for life. Now, if you need work done around your place, you can always find the numbers in the description of these videos, or you can go to the 24/7 Services website and fill out the Contact Us form. Oh, and before I forget, happy birthday to Tony Morley. 24/7 Services was even at his house working recently. Can you believe Tony turned 70 on Monday? What a gent, what a character, what a player, and he is the next in my series on all-time influential villains. I'm looking to have that out for the international break coming up. Big moment number 3, Trossard's timing. Now, you may think the game-winning goal deserves to be higher up a top 3 list than number 3, but it's not the number 2 or even number 1 moment from this match. And just like our substitutes made an impact and scored the game-winning goal last week in London, the Belgian had barely stepped onto the park before he made an instant impact. There was a lot to this goal. The change of possession prior to Arsenal scoring was a goal kick which came after Ezri Konsa put his volley just whiskers wide. Now, I'm not sure if Ezri was trying to score and test Raya on that one or whether he wanted to play it to the back post for somebody else to tap in, but from that goal kick, Arsenal built up possession about 90 seconds before scoring. Fine margins. Luka Dean, who I thought had another very good game, decides to have a little nibble at Bukayo Saka, but he couldn't come up with a football there. Then they kind of lock arms a little bit before Saka releases, and it's at that moment, that split second, gaining a yard, that Ødegaard plays the penetrating ball. And I think Luka Dean expected it to run over the byline, which it didn't. And this is a game of seconds and inches and yards. And when that ball goes across and then in, you could see Luka Dean has that little hop of frustration, knowing that he was probably just a half yard or wrestling with Saka a little bit longer from that going in. As is so often the case, it becomes impossible to watch both the football in that area of the box along with the danger area in the goal mouth and all the moving bodies. And yes, the ball takes a very fortuitous ricochet off Rodgers to Trossard, but Leon Bailey kind of let him go, which is such a shame because Bailey put a lot of work in this game defensively. Do you remember earlier when he snuffed out a break by Arsenal where he was virtually the last man back? Unfortunately, Trossard was his man. Some people thought it was Nedeljkovic. No, he had his eyes on Declan Rice there. Trossard knew the second he made contact, it was in. Interesting celebration, too, giving off this kind of, what do I have to do to get a start in this team type vibe. And as I alluded to earlier, in a footballing game of chess, that was check. Thomas Partey was checkmate because both teams are so capable of shutting up shop defensively. Big moment number 2, Watkins whiff number 1. I really felt bad for Ollie Watkins after this game, as did his teammates, because apparently he was obviously down. And the irony of him becoming an instant England hero by scoring late against Holland is that meant it extended his summer of work, and the recovery time was going to infringe on Aston Villa's preseason. I know Ollie Watkins didn't play in every single game for England and didn't go 90 minutes. Doesn't matter, though. After a long season, you need mental and physical recovery time. And I just wonder if maybe he was also carrying some kind of minor injury as well. People will say, well, Bukayo Saka played almost every game for England. He was fresh as a daisy on Saturday. Basically, basically setting up both goals. Difference is Bukayo Saka turns 23 next week. Ollie Watkins turns 29 in December, and that does make a difference. Plus, Ollie Watkins plays a very demanding physical role where he's getting battered around every week as our focal point. So, tough decisions for Unai Emery, even before West Ham. He had to look Ollie Watkins in the eye and say, "Are you ready?" And do you think Ollie Watkins is going to say no? Of course he's not. The first big, and I mean glorious, chance in minute 25 was the result of Villa pressing high for what I believe was the first time in that first half. Other than that, this was a very cagey, tactical, disciplined type game, which is the hallmark of a major statement early season game where one team can start the year with a 100% record. And for most of that first half, Villa sat off, gave 10 yards to the Gunners and let them have the ball, and it worked because apart from Saka's chance in minute 16, there was not a lot going on in Villa's defensive third. I was trying to figure out, by watching it again and again, what was the trigger that prompted Leon Bailey to release and put Gabriel under, because he turns the ball over there. Gabriel thought he was fouled, and then Rodgers clocks it right away, finds Ollie Watkins, and even if this was early last season, Watkins tucks that home. I mean, he had time to settle the ball before finishing it in this case. And I said last week, the most important thing is creating chances. Unai Emery said the exact same thing after this game. Ollie Watkins creates chances with his movement. He will eventually settle them. But obviously, that goes in there, the game changes entirely. That doesn't mean Villa goes on to win it. That's not guaranteed, but the momentum changes in an instant. And the number one big moment that defined Villa 0, Arsenal 2, Watkins whiff, number 2. I always get irked a little bit when people say, well, he has to score. He has to score there. Unless you're Ian Wright, who was a pundit on my feed, who was a prolific scorer, who played in that league and understands the circumstances, well, then he has a right to say that. But when you're the average mucker that couldn't kick a ball in anger or couldn't direct a header on target from anywhere in the box, well, then I get the hump. We all know, if we've been following this closely, that the most critical person of all after this chance would have been Ollie Watkins. He's a consummate professional who prides himself and whose reputation is built on creating or finishing chances. So to have 2 grade A prime 5-star chances with the score 0-0, I can only imagine the mood in his household on Saturday night. In fact, John McGinn came on and said, we're all rallying around Ollie because he's pretty down right now. The most important thing is that he does not allow this to fester and become some kind of momentum ball. He's got to park it now. And yet again, Ollie Watkins' instincts took him to the very place in the box where that ball was going to wind up via what might have been Amadou Onana's first ever Premier League goal using a foot via a wicked deflection, but it was another big chance, which means consecutive big chances, more than enough to win this game. And although I have to give some credit to Rea for being down and then up so quickly again and getting his fingertips to it, this 100% comes down to Ollie Watkins just not being as sharp as his teammates and opponents. That sharpness and Ollie Watkins' day in general can be well reflected by his statistical numbers. He was dispossessed 3 times. That's rare for him. He only completed 2 of 6 passes. He only won 1 of 6 ground duels, and that's on top of his 2 big missed chances. I simply refuse to believe that Ollie Watkins will have a worse day than this one in either the Premier League or the Champions League this season. I'm being very serious when I tell you I am very encouraged by how many great situations we've created in our first 2 games against what I consider to be very good and difficult opponents, top sides even, and we haven't really allowed a lot either at the other end. But these very reactive comments of sell Watkins now and why isn't Duran starting, predictable but also ridiculous. John Duran's per minute scoring record is impressive, but he cannot do what Ollie Watkins does for us in a holistic way, at least not yet. And Although we definitely need another right-footed defensive type who's versatile, I still think we are desperate for some cover up front. A 9 who can also play 10, who can also play as a wing, and it's going to be very interesting to see if Monchi can pull that off before this weekend. Since we last spoke, our pursuit of Joao Felix officially came to an end as he signed with Chelsea. Now, supposedly, we were in direct contact between the two sporting directors of Villa and Atletico Madrid, getting closer to a price, but then the Samu Omarodian deal collapsed, and that was somehow tied to the Conor Gallagher to Atleti deal. Then Jorge Mendes got involved, and he's going to the place where he's going to get the biggest profit, and that was probably going to be Chelsea. He brokers the deal, and it's all done. And I have to say, I was miffed when I watched Felix scoring that 6th goal at Wolves. He is undoubtedly a huge talent, and he looks happy. I just simply cannot understand how Chelsea can keep signing all of these big-ticket players and have such a huge squad of high earners. I mean, their bomb squad is worth more than some Premier League sides. I'm telling you right now, Chelsea is going to be punished, and probably punished hard. But like Weston McKennie, we may look back on this one day, and by the way, he's just re-signed with Juventus after all of that drama. We may look back on not signing Felix with some sense of relief, especially the way Morgan Rogers is playing. Perhaps that Felix money could be better spent somewhere else if we're going to spend it at all. Recapping the subcategories after the Arsenal loss, I was so hoping to start this season with 6 out of 6 points and 3 out of 3 at Villa Park. And between Bailey's big miss at West Ham and the 2 from Watkins this week, it really could be a different story in terms of the combined goal scoring between them. Funny enough, Villa was caught offside 3 times to Arsenal's once in this game, but we are drawing fouls, the majority of them, which illustrates that over the course of 2 games, we are getting into good positions all over the park and, winning some duels and escaping with the ball, which forces fouls. Time to look ahead now, as it's off to the King Power Stadium, the ground that Yuri Tielemans helped build, as we battle Leicester away. The last time we were at this ground, Bertrand Traore was the late hero as Villa carried on their top 7 push. I'll never forget that game because that was the last game before my first ever trip to England, and my first ever game was the home game against Nottingham Forest, where Bertrand Traore again unlocked Nottingham Forest, managed by Steve Cooper, who's now in charge of the Foxes. This is going to be an interesting test, derby-like atmosphere, and one that we can't overlook. A lot of Foxes fans have been very unhappy with how their club has conducted business this summer, and yet they drew Spurs 1-1 at home and then lost narrowly at Fulham 2-1 this past weekend. And on paper, you're looking at it and you're going, well, Villa should probably win this game, but we all know that's not how the Premier League works. And here's where losing a big game against Arsenal may have had the effect of like a rock hitting the hornet's nest, because Villa will want a response this weekend. And you also know that Unai Emery and his staff will treat this game with the utmost respect and prepare for it with the same meticulous detail as they did Arsenal. Just to wrap things up, I want to express my sincere gratitude for your viewership, and it is incredible how big our fan base is around the world. Here's a great example. My friend Steve Goff, not to be confused with Villa superfan Steve Goff, who arranges a lot of the away travel. My friend Steve Goff, he's in Italy, and he's on a Vatican tour, and he bumps into Tim and Francis from Portsmouth. While the accents are heard, the conversation revolves around Canada, then Vancouver, and the question is asked, do you know Pete? And Steve says, he happens to be one of my best friends, and he's practically a neighbor. This is utterly bonkers. But thanks for watching, Tim and Francis. They tried to get in to see the Pope, but obviously he was too busy getting instructions from Paul McGraw. Until the Leicester game, be well, stay positive and optimistic, and of course, and as always, up the mighty Villa.